Okay, I've just gone live. I'll just have to turn off the thing on my computer. Um, Hello everyone. This is just 5 minutes of teching before the show, so hope you can hear me and see me. Okay. Did I tell you nobody? You like it? Oh, you haven't seen the dress yet. You'll see the dress in a minute. I'm just I'm just I've got um, the iPad angled up so that you can see my do. Um, yeah. It's actually a Marie Antoinette wig, which is not strictly Baroque. In fact, hello Eric. Um, so this Marie Antoinette wig isn't strictly Baroque. Um, Actually, it's well, Marie is very firmly actually in the classical period of music, 1755 to 1793. Um, but my little joke, which I debuted during a Bastille Day concert last year, can you see my little joke? Oh, I frequently lose my head. Nobody? So, yes, my little joke on Bastille Day last year was to wear the Marie Antoinette wig with a guillotine. Sorry, I've got to look. I've got to look into the. I've got to look into the camera, haven't I? I like to look at myself. Concert, concert. No, I didn't wear a corset. Um, I got a bunch of mates together last year because Bastille Day happened to fall on a Sunday for the first time, and yes. Well, actually, it was actually she actually said brioche, which is a kind of sort of sweet bread. So it's not strictly cake. So that's an incorrect statement to say. She said let them eat cake because she said brioche, which is a kind of bread. I'm pedantic like that. Um. So I'm assuming you can hear me okay and see me okay. Um. So I'll just focus down so that you can see the dress. You like? So this I also got off Wish. Wish have a great cosplay section. So no. Wish.com have a great cosplay section which I absolutely adore. And they unlike other costume shops, they cater for the bigger girl. Although actually I have lost quite a deal of weight. I suppose 20 kilos, 20 to 25 kilos in the last few years. Yeah, I have quite a few. Believe me, I'm not going to run out. Okay. Right. 1 minute. Um. I don't. Right. I just want to make sure I get the top of the wig when I'm playing, and that you can still see the bass recorder. That's good. Okay. Oh yeah. I love The Simpsons. I've been following them ever since they started, and I love the little musical jokes they have. Marge Simpson's hair. Yeah, but it's not blue. um, there's little musical jokes in The Simpsons that I pick up because I'm a classical musician. Of course, I was brought up on Bugs Bunny and Looney Tunes. And it wasn't until I started playing in QIO 3, Queensland Youth Orchestra 3, back in 1991, that I found one of the greatest jokes in Looney Tunes. It has to do with Mendelssohn's Fingal's Cave Overture. And da 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 dum, da 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 dum. And I played that in QIO 3, and then I realised that it's actually in several Looney Tunes cartoons with this little black bird that comes out of like a rumbling mountain, and he got this funny walk, so he goes ba da 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 dum, ba da 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 dum. I love it. But the little joke in The Simpsons that happens all the time, and I love it, is every morning when they have a morning sing, you hear this, which is actually a corruption of, and someone picked up actually that they heard a little bit of Peer Gynt in my Zet Nerd drinking video, and that's Morning from Peer Gynt by Grieg. But there's little, and even Family Guy has lots of music jokes as well. And when I finally get the next highlights reel done, you'll hear a few musical jokes in there as well, because I'm really outdoing myself this time. Okay, so good morning in Australia. Good afternoon in New Zealand, good evening in the States. Welcome to my live stream from my bedroom. Kathy Williams-Devries goes for Baroque, or really Baroque. Yeah, thanks. So, going to tell you a story, and it's not unlike Nick Zentner's, actually, in how I came to take up the recorder. Because actually, if you've been following my YouTube channel for the last 11 years, you would realise that actually I'm a clarinet player. And I've been a clarinet player since the age of 9. When I first picked it up, fell in love with it and said I want to, my first goal was to get into the conservatorium, hereafter known as the Con. Now I actually started on recorder. Every Australian kid has to at the age of 7, and I did it for a couple of years. But then I started playing the clarinet and the recorder fell by the wayside. Now, so I studied at the conservatorium. I then went over to London and studied at the Royal College of Music, which was not a happy experience. I was offered quite a substantial scholarship to the Longy College of Music to study with Jonathan Kohler, but by then I'd had it with thinking about classical clarinet as a career, and came back to Australia. But I did sort of pick it up again, and so I picked up the clarinet again, and I decided to do a master's. I didn't want to do a master's to further my career. I just wanted to do a master's to say I have a master's. So I started a Master of Music Studies at the Conservatorium in 2010. And about halfway through, I realised I don't like a lot of modern clarinet music. And it's the reason I don't play the saxophone, because I just don't like the repertoire. And I was always looking back. I performed the Mozart Clarinet Concerto with the Conservatorium Symphony in 1999, which was broadcast on radio, and I can provide the link below for that particular broadcast. I actually did 2 concertos that year. A second concerto with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra, the Copeland Concerto. But anyway, the Mozart Clarinet Concerto was actually written for Anton Stadler on basset clarinet. Now, modern clarinet only goes down to low E. The basset clarinet of Anton Stadler's, and in a couple of weeks, I'm going to do a live stream on the history of the clarinet. So the basset clarinet goes down to a low C, and of course the Mozart Clarinet Concerto was written to accommodate that low C. Now what happened was that Stadler managed to lose the manuscript, and also the basset clarinet fell out of favour for the modern clarinet, so that the Mozart Clarinet Concerto that most people play today only accommodates going down to a low E, and you really lose some fantastic writing by Mozart. Now, I started reading Colin Lawson's book about the Mozart Concerto and found out about young clarinet. But long story short, ever since 1999, I've been concerned with authentic performances. Now, during my Masters, probably halfway through, maybe around about 2012, I really wanted to play. I didn't like the modern clarinet repertoire, and most clarinet repertoire only goes back to about, well, the classical period. But I wanted to play Baroque music. I'd always loved Bach. I've been playing Bach's violin and cello suites since about the age of 15, when they were transcribed for clarinet in a book by Voxman, and I used it to improve my staccato. So always loved Bach, and I thought, but I really, really want to only play Baroque music. So I was thinking, I bought a C clarinet, and was playing Bach and Handel sonatas on the C clarinet, so I didn't have to transpose. And was thinking, oh, maybe I should get like an oboe or something, because there's, heaps of stuff written for Baroque oboe. And someone said, well, why don't you get yourself a recorder? And of course, my only experience had been the descant in primary school, but someone said, get yourself an alto. So I got myself an alto, and completely fell in love with it, although it drove me absolutely batty that I had to learn F fingerings. I explained that last week, that recorders come in a couple of different fingering patterns. You've got your C recorders, so your descant and that is a C recorder, because the lowest note's C. But you have F recorders. This is an F recorder. So even though this fingering looks like a C, it's actually an F. Drove me batty for ages. And then I found the Early Music Society of Queensland, of which I'm now secretary. And they had recorder afternoons once a month. And I was introduced to other recorders, such as the tenor and the bass. And I got myself tenor and bass, because as soon as I played the tenor, I fell completely in love with it. So through the Early Music Society, I started learning a great deal about the Baroque period. And one of the things about the The first thing about the Baroque period is that the pitch was lower. So I mentioned last week that when a modern orchestra plays and the oboe plays an A to tune the orchestra, that A is at 440 hertz. That's the pitch. The A is at 440 hertz. So if you were to bang a tuning fork, it vibrates 440 times a second. Now, in the Baroque period, and we're talking about the era of music from 1600 to 1750. Now, I call myself a Baroque specialist because I pretty much only play music from 1600 to 1750, although I do go into the Renaissance now. But in the Baroque period, pitches weren't quite as standardised as they are today. And Baroque pitch is actually at 415 hertz, which is about a semitone, half step lower than modern pitch. So, knowing that, I naturally had to get my... Now, it's easy for string players. If a string player wants to play at modern pitch 440 and then play at Baroque pitch 415, but not so easy on recorder. So, I actually discovered that they make recorders at 415. So, when I say 415, I mean Baroque pitch. So each of these recorders, and I'll explain them as we go on, is at 415. And I'll get to a bit later, but the French Baroque pitch was even lower at 392. So the reason I took up recorder, long story short, wanted to play Baroque music because I didn't think the clarinet was round then. And what you'll discover in a few weeks is that not only was there a version of the clarinet around in the Baroque period, there's actually two. The chalumeau and the Baroque clarinet. Yeah. Although modern recorders are actually probably at 442 now. Pitch has been creeping up. Okay, so and instruments were vastly different in the Baroque period. You did have Baroque oboes, you did have Baroque bassoons, made out of boxwood, a lot less keys. But I'll get into that in another live stream. So we're concentrating on the recorder and the fact that I like to specialise, like Nick specialises in Washington geology, I specialise in a period of music from 1600 to 1750, and it's a fascinating period. Now, even though, yes, you did have the Baroque oboe and the Baroque bassoon and the Baroque clarinet, the recorder was really, really hot stuff in the Baroque period, and composers wrote a lot of stuff for it. So you'll hear a couple of concertos, some suites. Now, I mentioned last week, hi Yelly, I mentioned last week the Sopranino recorder, which is smaller than the descant but bigger than the Gar-Klein. And believe it or not, people wrote concertos for this instrument. So if I can refresh it, I better make sure that I can get all the notes. So yeah, they do call it the piccolo flauto. So a few years ago, I was playing with Queensland Baroque, and we were doing Handel's water music, and they actually needed a flautino, piccolo flauto, and me being the only recorder player in the village, to have a 415 sopranino, I got the gig. That was a great concert. Actually, I played so well that even though that my part was doubling the violins, I actually got sorted out for a bow. So, I'm only going to play one movement of this concerto. It's a very, very hard concerto. And I've had to learn a lot of notes for today's presentation. And I'm going to have to concentrate absolutely fiercely. Because Baroque and classical music is very, very unforgiving when it comes to mistakes. They're very, very, very transparent. Not that I'll ever let on. That's Performance 101. You make a mistake, you don't let on, because half the time your audience is not going to know. Unless you go to piano recitals where the total piano nerds down the front with their scores are following every single note. Right. So, to begin, and also I noticed that someone on Facebook saw a picture of me playing this thing and said, that thing looks like it could destroy lives. I suppose... So, this is by Vivaldi. Many of you will recognise the name Vivaldi for his Four Seasons, or as classical musics call it, We Value Your Call, Please Hold. So this is the Vivaldi Concerto in C major for sopranino, recorder and strings, RV 444. So I'm only going to play the second movement, which is the Largo, and there's still a lot of notes in it. You'll find that a lot of recorder music is either written in C or F, occasionally B flat, because there's no keys on this thing. So chromaticism is quite difficult. So this is the second movement of the Vivaldi Concerto in C major for sopranino, recorder and strings. So that's that thing looks like it could destroy lives. Now I've actually prepared all of these, thank you JC, I've actually prepared all of these piano, well they're not piano accompaniments, they're accompaniments myself. So that one I prepared in Notion. There's a program on your iPad called Notion that allows you to input scores. So every single damn note, I put them all in. Okay, now this one's also a concerto, but I've used the harpsichord reduction. So we moved down from the sopranino to the descant. So this is a 4/15 descant. Looks a little bit different to my other one, my regular one. So this is a concerto of which I'm only going to play the first movement by Giuseppe Sammartini, a Italian composer, and I'm actually going to discuss the different Baroque styles from different countries. So, so this is for descant recorder. And again, there is a bucket load of notes, so hopefully I'm going to get most of them. I've only been learning this for the last week, actually. So I'm going to have to concentrate really, really hard. And hang on, I'll just adjust myself to the style of different, because obviously the fingers are in different positions. Oh yeah, okay. Okay, so we come to our next style of piece, because in the Baroque period, the composers would often base their... Yeah, actually, I should explain that. Now, because the recorder doesn't have keys, trills can be fun if you're crossing registers. So we use what are called trill fingerings or fake fingerings. So if I want to go from a B flat to a C, normally it would be, you know, impossible. So going from a D to an E, you're crossing a register because, and another favourite of mine is F to E, which would normally be, and you're going to see that a lot. So I'm going to move on to my alto recorder. This is a particularly expensive alto because it's 415. Let's see, it's a Venner Stainsby. Stainsby was a maker, a recorder maker. I think he was a general woodwind maker back in the Baroque period. So we come to our first musical style. And this is from Baroque Masters of Variation. And it's called a Chacon. This one's by Antonio Tommaso Vitali. So, let me read about the Chacon. So the musical form of the Chacon is a continuous variation, usually in triple meter and in a major key. This isn't. This is in a minor key. Generally characterized by a short repeating bass line or harmonic progression. And you're going to hear that at the beginning. I haven't chosen harpsichord for this one. I've actually chosen Baroque organ because I particularly like it. So the Chacon form, which is similar to the Passacaglia, although the Chacon sort of based on a harmonic progression, whereas a Passacaglia is actually based on a melodic bass line. So this is a Chacon by Vitali. His dates are 1663 to 1745, so he's very Baroque. And you will hear some fireworks. I'm going to turn up the accompaniment because the accompaniment is actually just as important as me. I'm never too much of an egotist to admit that the solo instrument is not necessarily the star, especially when you get into the Brahms, bigger clarinet sonatas. Okay, so let me just get used to the fingers on this one. And the top notes on, and just let me get warmed up a little bit. And I might just turn you around a bit. You can see me a bit better. And again, a lot of notes, so I'm going to have to concentrate very, very hard. So if my face looks a bit fierce, it's because I'm concentrating. So this is your bass line. few notes in that one. That's a long blow. There's literally not a single rest in that. And I actually had to expel air because it's a common thing with wind players that because you're breathing in and out so much, you tend to get extra air. So that's a bit of a blow. As is this next one. So there's a few notes in this next one. And you'll notice me do an interesting effect. Now, one of the, I suppose, contentious, one of the most contentious issues in the Baroque period, and we call what I'm into historically informed practice, where we use instruments sort of styled on instruments of the time. Kind of makes me feel closer to the music. Okay, that's interesting. Well, my book says Vitali. So, what was I? No, completely derailed my train of thought. So I adhere to historically performed practice as much as possible. And one of the contentious issues, and I had to throw a violinist out of my trio because we disagreed on this issue so much. And also their rhythm was completely terrible, which for the Baroque period is actually really, really important, is the use of vibrato. Now, a proper Baroque singer will not use a lot of vibrato. And you know what vibrato is, right? It's where you alter the note. So you alter the note sort of breath-wise, or you know how violinists do this. I'm not being suggestive, but so this is a straight, and then if I add vibrato, that's, but in the Baroque period, we tend to use as little vibrato as possible. And I mean, that's also because there's an awful lot of notes and you don't get, the viola's bigger than the violin. Yeah. So I don't tend, because I'm a clarinet player, I never use vibrato anyway. But I tend not to use vibrato on recorder when I'm playing Baroque music either. So that's one thing. Another thing is that in the Baroque... Oh, yeah. Yeah. You ever seen two-set violin? They're hilarious. They did a roast of the recorder a couple of weeks ago. Yeah, that backfired on them. We recorder players are fairly activist. So there are at least 3 videos that roasted them back in very fine, polite recorder style, of course. Two-set violin, love them. They're actually Brisbane boys because I first started watching their videos and I thought, geez, that looks like the Queensland Con, and yes. They started filming in the practice rooms of the Queensland Conservatorium. So another thing with the Baroque period is that trills are always approached from above. So now there's a little bit of recorder technique I'm going to use because in the Baroque period composers really only wrote the music sort of a basic tune, and then you expect to sort of improvise an ornament over the top of it. And I couldn't think of a good improvisation in Variation 14. In Variation 14, I couldn't think of anything interesting. So I'm actually going to, and this is more French Baroque than Italian Baroque, so, but I've seen it used in Handel, is I use, this is a style of, it's finger vibrato. It's called flattement. Because I couldn't think of anything interesting to do ornament-wise. So in variation 14 you'll see me do that, and I might even sort of come to the camera. So there's, okay, so this is a folia by Corelli, and let me just read to you what I found out about it. So this is also theme in variations. This is actually from a book called Baroque Masters of Variation. So La Folia was originally a dance, which was mentioned for the first time in a 15th century Portuguese text. It was a choreographic rite linked to fertility, during which the dancers carried men dressed as women on their shoulders. The fast rhythm of the dance, as well as its insane aspect, was certainly at the origin of the name, folia. Among a number of themes emerged a basic melody. Until the middle of the 17th century, it spread to Italy and France. Then the theme quickly evolved to take its final forms in this series of chords, D minor. Although this one is actually in G minor. So you go D, A7, D, C, F, C, D, M, A7, D, A7, D, C, F, C, D minor, A7, D major, I suppose. Yeah, okay. So appearing around 1650 and then published in 1672 by Lully. Now, I don't know if you know about Lully, but he died tragically because back in those days, conductors didn't do this. Lully had a stick, which he would bang on, God, that looks suggestive. Oh. He would bang on the floor. And he got so worked up during a performance that he started banging the stick on his foot during the performance and got gangrene and died afterwards. So that's Lully for you. So appearing around 1650 and then published in 1672 by Lully, this melody was stabilised by slowing down and become the theme of countless variations, the most famous of which were those of Corelli published in 1700. No, I don't use cataracts. So that's this one. From that moment, Les Folies consciously and sometimes unconsciously inhabited Western music and never left it. Most of the time they took the form, theme and variations. Sometimes they were only a quote with not much development. Sometimes they were only an inspiration for another melody. They are even hidden in certain works, such as in the Andante of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. Even if the 19th and 20th centuries were less rich in folias, they inspired many composers such as Liszt, Paganini, Rodrigo or Rachmaninoff, who titles his variations on a theme of Corelli because he did not know the exact origins of the melody. Nowadays, the Folies, between 150 and 200 versions, still haunt our musical imagination, and we can find them in film music, the soundtrack by Barry Lyndon by Kubrick, inspired by the Sarabande by Handel, or that of 1492 by Ridley Scott, composed by Vangelis. And more surprisingly, in the world of video games, a soundtrack from Final Fantasy IX, composed by Uematsu, and also the solo violin of Corelli's Folia in the game Assassin's Creed Unity. I don't know anything about video games, so. Husband said he used to play it. Peanut Gallery. So. Okay. So you'll hear the original tune, and again, I want you to listen to the harpsichord part, which is just as important as my part. And I know the part intimately because I inputted every single note into Notion. And there's a lot of notes in this one, so just let me concentrate. Okay. I noticed someone asked how I get these pieces up in a week. These are actually pieces that I have performed in the past. And I know that last piece took me about a month to prepare when I did it last year. So I've done these before. It was just a matter of working them back up again. So I'm not learning these pieces from scratch apart from the Saint Martini. But also in my clarinet days, I was absolutely obsessed with technique, so scales and studies. And in Baroque music, that comes in handy because, as you notice, there's a lot of, especially arpeggios. So your scale, your arpeggio skips every second note. So you'll notice that there was a lot of scales and broken chords and stuff. Okay, I'm not finished with this particular recorder yet because the alto recorder was the absolute star of the Baroque period. Unfortunately, as instrument makers started making the Baroque oboe and the Baroque clarinet turned into the classical clarinet, the Baroque oboe turned into the classical oboe, wind players kind of became king in the classical period. Mozart was one of the first composers to write for the classical clarinet in his symphonies. So instrument makers would gradually, add more keys, and then they moved from boxwood to harder woods to accommodate the key work. And so the recorder kind of fell out of favour after the Baroque period, and then only came back into style again in the second half of the 20th century. So this is another big Baroque composer, Georg Telemann, and he wrote some lovely stuff for recorder. This is a sonata in F major. Notice that I did say that a lot of pieces for the recorder are either written in C, F, B flat, D minor, because there's no keys, and so if you have to go from, say, F sharp to G sharp, yeah. So, again, I inputted every single note into Notion to produce this. Now, what I'm hopefully going to try and illustrate is some use of Baroque ornamentation on the repeats of this, so that the repeat sounds different to the original tune, the original section. And again, there's a lot of notes, so excuse me. My top Fs aren't coming out so well today. I apologise if there is any real recorder players here that have probably turned off in disgust, because I was missing a few top Fs here and there. between movements, please. Okay, now I mentioned before that the different countries had different styles of Baroque music. So now we move into the French Baroque. So I'm going to pick up my 392. Now what I mean by that is I've been talking about pitches, so A equaling 440 in the modern period, although orchestras do tune at 442, that's gradually been creeping higher and higher. I don't know if you know about the earth tone, but 432 is said to be the resonant earth tone, and it's supposed to be really, really relaxing. Classical pitch was, and romantic pitch was 430. and you can buy specialist instruments for that. But the French Baroque went down to 392, which is a semitone lower than Baroque pitch, regular Baroque pitch. So I have, and this is the only one in the Village. Doesn't look much different, but you can tell it's a little bit bigger. Again, it's a Venice Stainsby, but it's a 392. Now, I'm only going to play a short piece on it by Otterterre. Now, I'm going to mention Otterterre in a minute because he also made recorders. No, I don't play professionally. I'm not good enough, and I don't want to be good enough. So this is a rondo by Otterterre, and I'm going to talk about suites a little bit later, but I'll show you what I mean by it's a different pitch. So here is exactly the same note. This is on my 415. That's a D. It's lower. No, I'm not. I'm not a pro. I'm not a recorder player. I'm a clarinet player that knows recorder fingerings, and any recorder player watching this broadcast would probably tear me to pieces. Okay, now this piece by Otterterre, I actually had to prepare the piano part, the harpsichord part myself, because it was written in the Baroque period. We had what was called figured bass, and harpsichord players were actually master improvisers, and they were taught how to improvise on a figured bass. It's a bit like a jazz piano player today. You give them a chart of chords, and then they improvise the right hand. Same deal in the Baroque period. It's one of the first things we were taught in writing techniques when I was at the conservatorium in my first year. So top part is the recorder part. Bottom line is all that was written for the harpsichord player, and you can see those figures, and those indicate the chord. So a 7 would indicate that you add a 7th to the chord, taking out 5ths, various inversions, that sort of thing. So I actually created my own right hand from the figured bass. Now you'll notice this Otterterre is very ornate. There's a lot of ornaments actually written in, another interesting thing is that when you look at these scores, if they're not published, you can go on a site called imslp.org. It's old music porn for me. It's brilliant. And often, this is what you're faced with. But what's interesting in French Baroque music is that the treble line is actually written in French Baroque violin clef. Because back in those days, obviously, you had manuscripts and it was fairly valuable. You didn't want to write too many ledger lines, so that in the Baroque period, there were many, many different clefs, so they didn't have to write ledger lines. And French Baroque violin clef is a treble clef, but instead of being curled around the second bottom line, is actually curled around the bottom line. You basically read it as bass clef, but up a few octaves. So this is by Otterterre. I'm performing it at 392 in French Baroque pitch. So I love this. I love this particular alto. It's so much, it's even, because it's that semitone lower, I love it. And that's French Baroque pitch. So you can see I'm really hip, historically informed practice. Okay, so I mentioned Otto-Terre. He made wind instruments. He made recorders. Now this wasn't actually made by Otto-Terre. It's a copy of an Otto-Terre recorder. And you'll notice that I've had keys put on it. Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? Oh, okay. I've forgotten my music. Hang on. I thought I had everything. I don't. Okay, I can't play you that one. That's okay. We'll get back to this because I've got. Don't even know where it is. It's in my study somewhere, but yeah. That's all right. I was going to play, it was only a short piece anyway, but I've got a piece that I'm going to finish with on the tenor. But, how embarrassing. Okay. Oh, I should have done this before. It wasn't my best idea. Okay, so we cannot, I cannot do a session on Baroque music without the great J.S. Bach. So, I mentioned before that I've been playing Bach for a long time, transcribed for clarinet. He wrote these solo suites for cello and violin. Now, I mentioned last week that my bass recorder is a recorder and a half. So, and what I meant by that is that, see, these recorders come apart. You don't just stick them in the case. Up the back, Star Climber. What's my favourite Bach piece? It would have to be the Art of Fugue. Okay, so one thing that attracted me to Baroque music is I was very emotionally damaged after my time in England, to the point where I couldn't play music at all. I could only, oh, my guillotine's come off. I could actually only play scales and studies for many, many months after I got an absolutely scathing review from my teacher that said that I was the worst student he had ever taught. Because, and I'm a frustrating student because I like to question things. I don't take everything at face value. Yeah, I don't take everything at face value, and I like to question things, and I like to ask around. And my teacher said that I was the most frustrating student he'd ever had because I never took any notice of what he said until I'd asked around. And what he didn't seem to get was that I actually did eventually take on board what he said, but I had to think about it. I had to process it. So what brought me to Baroque music was that sort of being emotionally damaged, I couldn't emote. Very scared of my emotions, and before that I was an extremely emotional musician. Now, and I went and saw a master class with Murray Pariah at the Royal College of Music when I was there, and he had a novel approach to the emotional interpretation of music, in that he used the harmony to bring out the emotion. Whereas I remember a trombone player that I had a lesson from back in 1999 was like, oh, you know, how does this make you feel? What do you feel when you play this? And I remember I went to a lot of singing master classes, and of course that's all about feelings. And I remember one particular master class, a male singer was singing a love song to a bottle of beer. Oh, you see, they didn't have a girlfriend or boyfriend at the time, and their greatest love was beer. But what draws me to Baroque music, and I may appear emotional when I play, I'm not actually thinking about any sort of emotion. I'm actually reacting to the delicious harmony. Because when you get into the classical period, the amazing counterpoint and harmony of the Baroque period disappears and you get pretty tunes. And it's not till you get into the sort of the Romantic period that they bring back those really, really rich harmonies. And believe me, Baroque music can have intense, crunchy harmonies. It's, it's just... And actually, if you go further back into the Renaissance, and a guy called Gesualdo, who wrote madrigals, his harmonies are just wrong. So I'm getting excited. Oh yeah. So I'm not completely sold on these particular arrangements, but I'm going to play some of the Bach cello suites on my bass recorder, and I said it was a recorder and a half. I said it was a recorder and a half because this is the 415 version of it. That's the 440. So that's my recorder and a half. That explains that from last week. Okay. So what I do in my interpretation of these Bach cello suites is I let the harmony guide my phrasing. Because it's just written straight semiquavers. No one ever plays it like that, unless you're absolutely boring. But I don't, yeah. So, now these suites are based on dances. So you have your prelude, which is then followed by Allemande, Courante, Minuet, Sarabande, Peanut Gallery. Shut up. Sarabande, Minuet and Trio, and Gigue. And if I might just explain what an Allemande and Courante are. So it's actually German for dance. So it's a Renaissance, and the Allemande is a Renaissance and Baroque dance, and one of the most popular instrumental styles in Baroque music. It's often the first movement of a Baroque suite of dances prepared with a subsequent Courante. But it's sometimes preceded by an introduction or prelude. So in this case, I'm going to play parts of two Bach cello suites, and there we start with a prelude. And you will recognise this prelude. I've seen it it's in all the ads, and often I remember a friend of mine, Greg, if you're watching, I think your father's funeral last year. We played Yo-Yo Ma, and I don't think Greg's here. So the Allemande originated in the 16th century as a duple meter dance of moderate tempo, already considered very old, with a characteristic double knocking upbeat of occasionally 3/16 notes. Appears to be derived from a German dance, but no identifiable dance and no German dance instruction from this era survives. And then the Courante, or Italian corrente, literally means running. So it's the Courante or corrente, Coranto, or are some of the names given to a family of triple meter dances from the late Renaissance and Baroque era. In a Baroque dance suite, an Italian or French Courante is typically paired with a preceding Allemande. So Courante literally means running, and in the later Renaissance, the Courante was danced with fast running and jumping steps as described by Arbeau. But the Courante, commonly used in the Baroque period, was described by one of the Kapellmeisters in Hamburg as chiefly characterised by the passion or mood of sweet expectations. For some, there is something heartfelt, something longing, and also gratifying in this melody. Clearly, music on which hopes are built. It was written in Musikalisches Lexikon that the rhythm of the Courante is absolutely the most serious one can find. During the Baroque era, there were two types of Courante, the French and Italian. French type is usually notated in 3/2, 3 minims and a bar, but employing rhythmic and metrical ambiguities, including the hemiola. And I didn't mention the hemiola. The hemiola, Baroque composers love the hemiola. Hemiola. And you actually have heard a couple of hemioli today, but you didn't know it. The most famous, the hemiola is where you've got a rhythmic figure that doesn't fit neatly into the bar. So say if you're in like a 3 time, you'll actually have 3 sets of 2. Cool. So the most famous hemiola is actually at the beginning of Richard Strauss's Tellurlenspiegel, and it drives horn players mad because it's on every single audition. But it's a five-note figure. And that starts Tellurlenspiegel. Oh, okay, is anyone else buffering? Okay, I don't appear to be buffering. So, yeah, these Bach cello suites and violin suites are profound. What I love it is it's a conversation with yourself, and sometimes more than one of yourself. That's one of the things I like about Baroque music is the hidden melodies. So if you're going, the melody is, but you're hearing, and these are rife in the Bach cello and violin suites. A conversation with, I hear there's horrible protests over that policeman standing on that guy's neck and killing him. Okay, so this is Suite 1. This particular arrangement by Francis L. Fitzpatrick loses something in the translation, because obviously the recorder doesn't have as wide a range as the cello, but it gives you an idea. And also there's some string crossing things going on which are lost on the recorder, but I'll try and bring them out anyway. So this is the prelude. Too much talking from me. And actually I'm getting really tired, so I'm not going to play any more Bach, but you get the idea. Because I've been at this for 100 minutes. Yeah, okay, so last piece is you're going to recognise, and I'm going to play it on my tenor, my haute-terre, because you can either play this on descant or tenor. I prefer the tenor. The reason I got keys put on it was because my fingers just couldn't stretch that. I only got small hands. So this is green sleeves to a ground. And what I mean is ground bass, which is an 8-bar figure of chords that's repeated over and over and over again. So it's a bit like our 12-bar blues of the Renaissance. When I did the Rizzicatas. So this is green sleeves to a ground. It's a set of variations. I thought I'd finish with this. And hopefully I'll get through it before I die. I didn't realise how long this program would be, and I also didn't realise probably how much I would talk, because there's so much to know about the Baroque period. Okay, so here is green sleeves to a ground, played on an haute-terre 4/15 tenor. And I did this accompaniment yesterday while I was watching the football, which is back on. Rugby league! And I shouldn't need to concentrate too much for this one. It's not as hard as the other ones. I played a lot of notes today. So I'm the only person in Brisbane that's got a 415 tenor. So yeah, I'm absolutely stuffed. If you want to ask some questions, I'll stick around for that. If anyone wants to ask any questions, thanks Yelly. Thanks Eric. Thanks. Yeah, I'm quite exhausted. I'm going to go and have a. Thanks, Graham. I look forward to reading your comments on the live chat when it uploads later today. So there's 11 of you here. That's amazing. I was nearly a clarinet professional. I did play in the Queensland Symphony Orchestra. Yeah, music's a huge part of my life. You know, when I married my first husband, he didn't quite understand it, and I really picked it up as my first marriage was crumbling, and I've never regretted it. I'm actually doing another music masters. I started playing recorder when I was 7. Played from I was 7 till 9, and then started playing the clarinet. Yeah, he was a right narcissistic bastard. Sorry if any kids are watching. But when I met my second husband, turned out that he actually had studied cello as an undergraduate, although he works as a public servant in database management. But I'm very, very good friends with his mum. She's a piano teacher. And his brother, who very tragically passed away a few days before Christmas last year, and we're still really, really reeling at that. He was a violinist and composer, and I think I will actually play you a piece he wrote for his son, that he wrote for his son to play on clarinet. I'll play that in a few weeks. It's going to take me a few weeks for me to get my clarinet chops back. No, husband doesn't play anymore. He actually sold his cello a few years ago. I played with his mum, although at 79 she's not as good on the piano as she used to be. I do have a favourite accompanist. His name's Mitchell Lee. He actually lives a couple of suburbs away. I often bump into him at the bowl shop on a Friday. We have similar priorities when it comes to what we do with our Friday nights. Yeah, it's called Cowboy Blues. I played it at his funeral in January. It's a really amazing piece. There is a version of it on YouTube by David Shepherd, but he never knew Peter the way I did. Peter's wife, Wendy, at the funeral said that, and mentioned it in the eulogy, which actually I read for her, that I played it the way that Peter would have liked it played. He was he was an amazing fellow. He tragically took his own life a few days before Christmas. So yeah, that's tough. So I won't keep you any longer. I'm going to take off this wig because it's very hot, and this dress very hot. It's almost winter here, yet it's still quite warm. So I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that you guys have been here. I look forward to reading the live chat when it comes online. Yeah. So I'm going to have a, as you can see, I'm sweating like a pig. I'm going to have a long drink of water and probably have a sleep because Nick's on at 2 a.m. in the morning tomorrow. It's such a killer. But I'm going to watch some rugby league too. And then I've got to work on the highlights reel for episodes 41 to 50. I've got some really fun music for that. What I'm going to do next week for the live stream, if I can figure it out, is I'm actually going to do a behind the scenes expose on how I record my highlights reels music tracks. And all the retakes that go in and swearing. Yeah. Well, it's not going to be beer. I was crook. I was crook all day yesterday into the evening from that hangover. Yeah. So I'm going to sign off. Geez, this has been almost 2 hours. Bloody hell. Yeah. So thank you so much for tuning in. A few of you are asking for requests last week. I don't do requests, but if you would like to hear Amazing Grace, I have excellent versions of it on my YouTube channel on clarinet, playing with my friend Greg Hate Sabo on pipe organ. And it's a gospel version of Amazing Grace that we really, really love. I'll post them. We record. It's kind of our party piece. We love it so much that we play it all the time. So I'll put a couple of links below to Amazing Grace on clarinet and pipe organ. Oh, you'll find plenty of clarinet videos. I actually have a if you like listening to the accent. I have a series of videos in a playlist called Fireside Musical Chat, which I get together with my old clarinet teachers from when I was 12. We happen to live in the same suburb about 5 minutes away from each other, so we get together every so often for a chat. And yeah, so thanks so much for tuning in. And I'll be sure to see you in about, 14 hours or so. Bye for now.